Okay, right. So what I've done, I've had a little bit of a rethink on the course schedule. We're still going to cover lighting and portraiture tonight, but I'm going to cover off.
Sorry, Rafe, just quickly, your microphone's really in and out again. Sorry.
Okay, thanks. I'm back at home today, so I'm hoping the internet's going to behave. Let me see if there's any devices I can turn off that might help. Okay, we're going to have to hope for the best on this one, guys. Bear in mind, it could possibly be your connections. I'm not ruling that out as well. But I've turned off everything I can. If I actually, hold on. Just try shut down my browsers. Okay, just letting a couple more people in. Right, going to give this a go, guys. I can't do any more in terms of freeing up my internet, so I'm going to have to just roll with it. The course schedule, all I've done is I brought forward the bit on light composition moment, because when I was writing the lighting and portraiture section, I realized that I really needed to cover that first, so you had a bit of an understanding of those key things. So there's going to be quite a lot in today. It's going to fill up the hour, definitely. We're going to have the opportunity to run over the exposure triangle stuff, because I know some of you guys that did the homework found it quite difficult shooting in manual mode for the last week. And I did think I probably need to recap that again. So we will definitely do another session on that with a bit of time put into it on the 22nd of Feb. So it's not a one and done on that. That is the main meat and veg of the course. So I want you guys to hear it again, and it's something that isn't going to happen in 5 minutes. It's definitely something you're just going to need to be resilient and practice, and just don't give up, because the whole idea is you guys don't just come off this course and just carry on shooting in auto and do what you were doing. The whole idea is to take control of your cameras. So I will spend more time on that on the 22nd. In terms of today then, I'm going to crack on and we'll start progressing through. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to explain the process that I go through for every photograph I take. And for the first two, light and composition, they will affect any photograph of anything. The third one, moment, is more specific to photographing people, or possibly even animals. But if you were shooting a building or a landscape, for example, then there isn't necessarily a moment that you're going to be looking for. So for me, being a social photographer, someone that photographs people for a living, this is the bread and butter of kind of what I do in terms of making a decision on, am I going to take a photograph? And if I am, how am I going to take it? When am I going to take it, etc. So this is going to help your photography of people massively. And if you can, again, with all the technical stuff that we've already covered and we'll cover again, if you can make this part of your thought process, I really think your photography will come on leaps and bounds. So first off, the first thing that basically dictates where I go, what I shoot, how I shoot it, is the light, which is the core subject for today. The light is really the driver for everything. If the light is poor and I don't have to take a photograph, then I won't take it. Obviously, as a wedding photographer, there are times when you're in churches and there's terrible light and you've got to take the photo anyway, because you can't influence that light and you can't move people, so you just take the photo. But if I'm taking photos of my couples or a family or anything else I'm being paid to do, then I will try and maximize the opportunity that the light gives us at that particular moment. So some examples of light, and obviously some of these photos will be, as this one is, bride and groom portrait time. It's fairly easy for me to go and find that light, and I kind of know what I'm looking for. In this example, you've got a beautiful sort of rim light from behind them that's, as you can see, sort of causing almost a halo effect around their heads. Knowing how to just put them in that light and balance the composition just makes that photo happen. Playing around with silhouettes. This photo looks like it was taken probably after the sun went down. It wasn't actually taken, I think, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in late April. It was a very bright day, but I changed my settings on my camera to let as little light in as possible by pushing the f-stop up and then pushing the ISO down and the shutter speed up. And I knew that if I got them to just walk through under there, that I could basically frame them with a tree and just make everything so dark that it looked like it was darker than it was. So just being creative. Again, the light here, it's kind of a winter wedding. We've got the light behind them sort of filtering through the trees. So it's a kind of a hazy kind of glow. And again, you know, it's a light-driven photograph. Obviously, I'm waiting for the moment they look at each other and laugh and smile, but it is driven by the light. And then finally on this one, this is light that's coming through side on from a window, which is over here. And I think I've held my iPhone up to reflect this window. No, this is a reflection. This is a reflection of that window, sorry. But the light is coming through here. You can't see the window the light's coming through, but it's a beautiful high quality side light. So once I've assessed the light and I've worked out how I'm going to use it, my next thing is to work on the composition. With this particular image, clearly my light is an artificial source. It's a flash gun. I think no, actually, I'll tell a lie. It's a video light. So I've actually got a video light which I can modify to create a circle of light, and I can focus that light on the wall and then stand a couple in front of it and then try and find an exposure to match the light that I'm firing. So with this, I match the power of the video light to match the light on the chandelier. So I wasn't firing any light at the chandelier. That's just the exposure for the chandelier, which was brighter than everything else in the room. I did a tiny bit of removal of some bits around here just to make it dark, but there wasn't much to do with this photograph. It took a little bit of tweaking to get it right, but it was just a case of getting it symmetrical and getting them in the middle. This one I think you guys have seen before. Again, it's a compositional photograph. You've got the 3 leads, 3 dogs leading into the groom. It's all about the composition on this one. The light's pretty flat and boring, as you can see. So the composition makes this image. And on this one, I've got the bride getting ready with some reasonable light coming through, just lighting up that small part of her face, and the putting the eye on the rule of thirds, as we covered a couple of lessons ago. And the last one, the composition set, just a very sort of small people in a scene kind of shot at, oh God, what's it called? Someone might know. Wharton House? No, not Wharton House, it's Milton Keynes. It's in Ampthill. It's, it might be National Trust, actually. I can't remember now. I'm not sure. I can't remember the name of it. Stupidly, I photographed there a couple of years ago. But it's access to the public. It's obviously a ruined old building. It's absolutely beautiful. I can remember the name of it later. I'll shout it out. But it's well worth a visit if you've not been up there. It's gorgeous. So this is just an engagement shoot for the couple. And again, it's all about the framing. Making very small in the frame. They did get photos a bit closer up than this, I promise you. I don't stand that far away from my couples. So finally, the moment, and this is the bit that's sort of relevant to the people photography. And these are photos that are purely driven by the moment. So regardless of the lighting that was available to me, these are moments I had to capture. So this is Jack doing a knee slide in his first dance, which not enough grooms do, to be honest. I wish they all did. And I suppose it would make it so special if everyone did it. But, you know, this was, luckily I had my flash gun set up that just in case someone got low on the floor, which sometimes happens on the dance floor, you need to be able to capture that. And if you fire them head height, you can miss this stuff. So luckily there was a gap in the dance floor, the light came through, lit Jack up, and boom. Again, just playing around on bouncy castle at the wedding, and we just managed to get this guy at the precise moment he was upside down. High shutter speed on this one, I assure you. Burst mode, get as many frames as possible, pick the one where he's in the best position, and there you go. This was quite an old one from 2016, but again, it's just an epic moment of the couple walking through the confetti line and the groom, facial expression, just, you know, a one-off really. Those sort of photos don't come along very often, so you've got to grab them when they do. But you've got to be shooting, focusing constantly. Don't put your camera down, keep it up, keep shooting, keep firing away. And when the registrar called Katie Samantha by mistake, which is quite funny, and that caused a reaction with Tom and Katie, which luckily I was in place to get. But I had my composition kind of worked out. I didn't want those out of focus fairy lights in the background to be cutting through their heads. So I was in the position I wanted, and then the moment was suddenly boom there, and I had to, you know, luckily my composition was ready so I could capture the moment. So, you know, expose my lighting, first of all, get my composition right, make sure the heads aren't going to be cutting through anything, and then hope the moment comes. You can't predict this stuff, it just happens. You've got to be ready when you shoot it. So, light composition moment. Now, there is the guy, I think, who taught me this a few years ago, legendary wedding photographer by the name of Tyler Worken, American guy. He actually put it as LMC, light moment composition, but for me it works better as LCM, because for me the moment is the final piece of the puzzle. The light and the composition comes first. So for me, any photograph, you need to have at least one of those three things to make it good. There's got to be decent light, a strong composition, or a really good moment. If you don't have any of those, it's a nothing photograph. And that might sound a bit cruel, but for me, I don't want to take nothing photographs. I don't take nothing photographs when I'm not working. And I certainly don't do it when people are paying me to get interesting compositions, moments, light, etc. So I shoot a lot less than I used to because I'm more picky on what I photograph. And I assess the light, the composition in the moment, whether I'm even going to bother taking a photograph. I think I mentioned this in a previous week that, you know, I'm really picky now, a bit of a snob, to be honest, on what I actually take a photograph of. But I'm not photographing for practice. And this is very different than the message I'm giving you guys. I'm not going to tell you guys, if you don't get any of these, don't even shoot. Because right now, you guys have got a crash course on photography over 6 weeks. There's a lot I'm throwing at you. And luckily, it's recorded and you'll be able to, you know, watch it back. But for you, it is one step at a time. It is getting used to manual mode, making mistakes, being comfortable with making mistakes, and then adding in, right, okay, I think I've got manual sorted now. Let's have a look at the light composition, the moment stuff. Let's tackle that. So for you guys, yeah, shoot everything all the time, constantly. Don't be picky. Make mistakes. If you take something that's not very good, then no problem. Just bin it off. But you will get some good stuff. You keep shooting, and the skill is to know what's good and understand why it's good. And that's the key, is understanding why it's a good photograph. And if it's taken deliberately because you framed it perfectly, or you followed some leading lines, or the light is amazing, then that's fantastic. But sometimes you just get lucky, and I got lucky when I was starting out, and I didn't sometimes know why the photograph was great. Again, I think I mentioned it in the first week. First photograph I ever liked, I didn't realize it was because of the quality of the light. I didn't even realize that. It took me years to work out why the light was so good. It was because it was late on a winter's afternoon and it just worked. So if I can give you this knowledge before you start taking a lot of these images that might end up being quite good, then it just means your hit rate is going to be a lot higher. So anyway, back to this. So I always make sure that it's got at least one element. Now, if it's got two elements, then that's the kind of photograph I really want to be taking. So any two of those makes a good photograph. If you ever get all three, where you get perfect light, amazing composition, and a moment happens, then it doesn't happen very often, even for me. That's a great photograph. But it is quite difficult to make natural moments happen perfect light. It's really difficult because then if you orchestrate them and you tell someone, can you go and stand over there and laugh like it's natural, it's not going to be a moment because it's going to be artificial. So you need to remember that, you know, the best moments happen, you know, quickly, instinctively, and you can't predict them. Well, you can, I say you can't predict them, I kind of have to with my job. I have to try and be in a position to predict them, but there's never any guarantees. And you can't, you know, have a dad walking into a bridal suite, see his daughter in the dress for the first time, in perfect light. It's very rare they walk into really good light. They normally walk into a really dark area with a tungsten bulb over their head, and I've got to try and still get that shot and make it look as good as possible. Because if I stop him halfway and move him over to a window, the moment's gone. It's just completely ruined. So it's usually a balance of moments happening, usually with great composition. But you know, your composition, there's no excuse for sloppy composition. This is what I would say. You can't make the light great. It's a grey day, it's a grey day. If no moments are happening, you know, you can't fake those. You can't make a moment happen. It's got to be natural. But you can compose. So that is something you can control. So the composition can happen with great light. Composition can happen with moments. And if you can pull it all together, fantastic. And sometimes when it all comes together, you know, I get some of my favorite images. So this is Bobby, who's wearing some giant fluffy dog slippers, sitting on the floor with her mates, doing that, is it the Superman dance? I'm not sure, can't remember what they call it now. They're sort of rocking backwards and forwards in a line. And I decided I would throw myself into where the band were singing and try and frame her between the singer's stilettos, because I thought that might be quite fun. And I think I ended up kicking the drummer in the face, but he was okay about it, and you know, no harm done. But you know, I was determined I was going to get that shot, and I wanted her looking up at the singer. If she'd have looked at me, then it would have killed the moment. It would have looked fake. It would have looked like I've gone, "Hey, Bobby, over here, give us a smile." It would have completely ruined it. So for me, I had to try and discreetly clamber into a band and lie on my stomach and frame between the singer's legs, whose stilettos were inches from my head and my hands, and hope for the best. But this one, again, it's a bride and groom portrait, but the moment is really with the wind whipping up the bride's hair. That's what makes this a moment. The light was good. It's not spectacular, but it's decent, and the composition's strong. I'm not afraid to crop a bit of the groom's head off there. That was intentional. But the bride's hair is what makes this, and where I've placed their heads in the frame kind of works. And there's some nice colours behind as well that don't distract too much, but add something to the image. This one here, going way back again, early 2016. It's a classic kind of bridesmaids train, really. They're all doing up each other's dresses. And that in itself is a moment. So I had to find the composition. Luckily, the bridesmaid at the front turned her head towards the window light, so you can kind of see the light is coming from over here. So you can see it's lighter here on her cheek here than it is on her hair here. But this is our light source, so she turns towards it and smiles. The bridesmaid at the back is also smiling, but out of focus, and I've got a good strong composition with leading lines. Simple photograph, still one of my favorites, you know, 5 years on. And another one where the composition was all pre-planned. I was going to go upstairs. I was going to gamble on getting this epic shot from the windows at Hatfield Household Palace. And I worked out my framing, my lens. I had my flashes sort of hidden away. In fact, my flashes, you can see there's one there and one there. And there's also another one down here, because if there wasn't one here, you wouldn't have them lit at the front here. It would just be rim light. So these are just kicking in a little bit of power, and the main light is just out of the frame down here, lighting them up. And everything is pointed towards the center of the dance floor. You can see how everyone else is a little bit darker than them, which is intentional, because I wanted them to stand out. This photo's about them. And then all I needed was a little moment within the dance where they were clear of everyone else, so they weren't sort of cutting into the crowd, and a little bit of separation. You know, again, I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know they were going to stay in the middle of the dance floor. I just knew that when that moment happened, I would be ready for it. We won an award with that one. So, when did I do that? It was late 2019, I think. So, so what makes a moment? Now, on here, one of these frames that I took from this wedding here won me a Fearless Award, which is Fearless Awards are like the granddaddy of wedding photography awards. They're the hardest ones to get. It's an international awards thing. They get tens of thousands of entries every month, and I've been entering for the best part of 5 years, and I've only won the one award, and it was for one of these frames. And I put this up in front of some wedding photographers when I was doing a wedding photography workshop, asking them which frame they thought it was out of these that won the award. And although it's going to be difficult with you guys on silent at the moment, I had actually a bit of a mixed response. They didn't all. Hang on. I'm just seeing the chat, guys, on here. Can everyone see this? Sorry, I've not had visibility of it until now. I think Lorna said she will be seeing it. I think, Lorna, you left the room because I think I let you back in, so that might have been the problem. If you want to type in a guess at which one of those was the one that won, go for it. We'll see if any of you get it. Getting a few for 2, a few for 3. Sonia says 4. Okay, glad you're all right now, Lorna. Got a few for 3. 5, 4. Thanks for your votes, guys. The winning one actually was. PowerPoint's doing, sorry, PowerPoint's doing it. Freeze up again. Come on, come on. I don't know if it's because the chat's there. Right, I'm going to minimize the chat. I don't know whether that's stopping it tabbing on. There we go. It was this one. It was number 4. So just flicking back. For me, you know, the light, the composition is strong in all of these. Obviously, the story is the pictures above. This is Barnes at Redcoats. I don't know if you've been there. And there is the one that we were trying to get, number 3. And there was them sat not doing anything at number 1, which none of you selected. And then there was them trying number 2. But the reason I put 4 in is because they haven't, I wanted to show the failure, the fact that Gemma couldn't actually manage to really hold it up very long. And the fact that Rory was cheating and actually holding it on with his fingers, and they, you know, Gemma was sort of finding that hilarious. So for me, that was the winner. Some of the others look a bit orchestrated. If they're looking at the camera, it sort of takes away from it. Lee coming in there, just mucking about, was obviously, it just looked a bit staged because he was looking at the camera. So it was always number 4 for me. So that was the winning one. So there you go. Okay, right. So now we're going to talk a bit more about lighting. Most of this is going to be about natural light, because I would describe myself as a natural light photographer, and I think probably anyone starting out is going to be wanting to master natural light before they start mastering artificial light. I only use artificial light, or flash or video light, anything that's not the sun, when I absolutely have to. If I can avoid using it, I will. And I will usually use it for more creative purposes than anything else. My cameras are at a point now where they will photograph at 12,800 ISO, f1.8 all day long. and they will shoot a dance floor in ambient dance floor light, which is dark, obviously, and they'll give me decent images. But sometimes you need to kick a bit of light in, and I will obviously use that when I need to. I'm not going to spend a long time on flash because you're not wedding photographers, and it's probably not something you're going to be jumping into at this point in your development. So, but I'll very quickly cover it. So natural light is what we're going to talk about mostly. Now, I have some rules, as always, that I sort of set myself, and that is that, as I said earlier, light is the key driver in all of my photographs. I try and think of light as my paintbrush. You know, I remember doing art GCSE and not being particularly brilliant at using pens and pencils, and I was just copying stuff basically because I just didn't have the ability to create with a pen or a pencil. And it wasn't until, as I said on my first lessons, late in my 30s, I suddenly realized that I had this ability to use a camera. But using the camera is just the technical side of it. The ability to use light and composition is the art of photography. And the light is, as I said, it's the first part of it. You know, you put this photo on a grey day, and they're completely in the shade, and you know it loses loads. It really becomes a very different image. So don't settle for safe flat light. Chase backlight, side light, flare light, etc. I'm going to go through the different types of light shortly. I'm going to show you examples. I'm going to explain each of them so you have a bit of an understanding. But don't think to yourself, I need to photograph this church, my dog, my car. I'm just going to photograph it anyway. Or a person, I'm just going to take a photograph of them. You know, if you can wait for the light to change, or if you can move that subject, and if it's a person particularly, obviously people will move, and you can move, you know, for people as well, to try and make the light more interesting. We're not just wanting to fire light from the camera. We want the light to come from different areas. So, as I've said, move around to recompose, be patient, take your time, be willing to walk away without taking a photograph if you're just not, you know, happy with what you're doing. That's more advice for myself than you guys. Like I said, I think trial and error is key. And I think you guys do need to take a lot of photos. So I would advise you guys to keep firing even if you're not getting what you want. The best light is always at the beginning and the end of each day. I've got a slide on that in a minute. I'll explain why. But it's only really by taking control of your camera that you can control the light and the effect it has on your images. So, you know, you are not going to be able to use the light if you're shooting in auto, because the camera will expose for whatever it sees in the scene, and it won't necessarily give you what your artistic, you know, your sort of creative brain is trying to do, which is why it's so important to persevere with the manual photography. You know, I can't even shoot in aperture priority mode because I'm so controlling over the camera. I'm sort of at that point now where I just do not trust the camera to meter the way I want and to give me the amount of light in the sensor that I desire. So that's why we're doing the whole manual thing. So backlight. Also, very similarly, rim light, very similar. It means the light source is behind, in this case, a couple. Could be behind a building, could be behind a landscape or a car or anything. But for the purpose of this, we're talking about people. So with this engagement shoot photo, you can see where the light is. It's just above the edge of the frame, just up here. And it's kind of hazy. It's autumn light, I think, this one. There's some lovely oranges and sort of browns. It's at Rowney Warren, which is my favorite place to photograph people. And it's kind of lighting up her hair quite nicely. And it's soft and it's kind of hazy and it's a bit dreamy and it's just really, really nice quality light. Now I'm exposing for their faces. So if I was to put the camera in even aperture priority mode, where it would meter for the scene on this, certainly in auto mode, then you'd end up with these guys almost silhouetted, because it would see all of this light here, very bright scene, and it would dial down the exposure, and it wouldn't let this light through to light their faces up. So you have to be telling the camera, no, I want to see their faces, and I don't mind if the background is a bit overexposed. You know, this area here we would call, you know, highlights, which are blown. You haven't got any detail in the sky up here. And the camera wants to correct that. The camera wants to make you be able to see everything in the frame. And it doesn't want blown highlights like there's a tiny bit here on the head. So it will make them darker than you want. But you want to see their faces. That's what they're paying you for, is to savor the moment. So you've got to take control, and you've got to say, no, we're letting this light in. We're letting this light come through. So you you basically control that. So backlight, as explained below, be careful with it. While you're experimenting with it, you will notice that you get flare coming through. There's a little bit on the chap's chin here, which I could have photoshopped out, but I kind of left it. I think intentional flare with a couple photos isn't a bad thing. But again, you know, I remember when I was taking this and when I'm moving around and I'm just constantly kind of trying to work out, I'm taking loads. I mean, I would have taken 100 photos of this scene at least, just to get that one that's spot on, where, you know, they've got that lovely look on their face, that smile, that laughter, but also that I haven't got the flare cutting through their heads, or, you know, the exposure's right and everything else. So, but because I'm manually setting the exposure, you see, I can just move around and know that whatever happens, their faces are going to be lit. If I go into an auto or a semi-auto mode, when their heads block the sun, so if I've got a bit lower and block the sun with their heads, then suddenly you're blocking the light. The camera's going to go, oh, okay, it's got a bit darker now, we need more light, and it's going to suddenly expose for their heads. Then I move away again, and it gives you a totally different exposure reading. So this is why manual is so important, that you can shoot in confidence, and unless a cloud comes across, nothing's going to change the exposure for that photo. You can just shoot away. I mean, clouds are a thing, and that is sometimes the bane of my life when a cloud comes over and you're in manual mode. And you've got to be aware of that, because the camera isn't going to be intelligent and counter for that, because you've told it you want full control. So you've got to be aware of that. But in this case, for me, this is why, one of many reasons why I like to shoot manual. So just be aware of that light spilling through. It can become problematic. It can wash out detail. But that is backlight. Side light. So good example here, again, sort of late afternoon. It's quite good quality light. It's not too high. The sun's kind of over here. It's not up here at the top. If it was, she'd have big shadows under her eyes there and under her nose. So we can see the angle of the light. It's perfectly lighting up her face. She's facing that way. I've had to expose this, you know, down. Again, you know, if you take a photo of this scene in auto mode, it would blow the highlights on her dress. It would probably blow highlights on her head as well, because there's a dark background behind. So it would be trying to light that as well. So for me, I'm trying to get the exposure so we can see the detail in the dress and detail in the face. But just getting someone to turn towards really good quality light and hit them from the side is so much more interesting. It's more three-dimensional than just having the light source coming straight on from here. It would just look really flat and really dull. There's nothing wrong in a bit of shadow, but you've got to be able to control those shadows. You've got to understand the impact of them. And if the light is low in the sky, then you're not going to have massive panda eyes. You're not going to have horrendous nose shadows. You'll always have a bit of a shadow under the nose, but it won't be too unflattering. In my job, I need to make girls look pretty. So I need to be very aware of this stuff. And then front light, which is in this case, diffused front light. I wouldn't have taken this photograph if it was full sun, because if it was full sun, we'd end up with lots of shadows and Dan would barely be visible. But because it's a soft light and it is coming from a similar direction that I'm photographing, it's okay. You know, it's sort of worked in this case, because Helen's face is pretty much completely lit, are a couple of little shadowy bits, but it's a pretty even exposure. It's a pretty safe photo. as long as she's the one that's lit, it's always a case of prioritize the bride in these situations. The groom is always a bit of an afterthought. And I've got a couple of ex-grooms on the lesson tonight. So no offense, guys, but you might, if you look back at your wedding photos, you might realize that your lovely wife has taken priority in these situations quite often. But the groom being there, you can very much see he's there. It doesn't matter that he's slightly in the shadow. It is, as I say, it's getting the light on the bride first and foremost. But, you know, it can look a bit washed out and a bit dull. This is an example where it's kind of worked because it is quite diffused light. It was a mildly overcast day, but in full sun, you know, I would not be photographing them facing the sun like that. It just would not look professional at all. And then reflected light. So my one and only snowy wedding that I did in oh God, what was that? That was when we had the original Beast from the East. So I think that was 2018, Feb 2018 or 2017. No, March it was, wasn't it? It was the last time we had that really, really heavy snow that sort of caused chaos in Hertfordshire and the surrounding counties. And I had a wedding and I struggled to get the car home from it, but I did manage to get there and get back. But when we went out, the couple were brave. It was -5 with a wind chill. It was bitterly cold. But reflected light is what it says. It's light reflecting off a surface, and that surface needs to be a reflective surface. So in the case of water and glass, rocks, snow, anything that's going to reflect light can be used. And in this case, that almost looks like I'm firing a softbox at face because it's so evenly lit and softly lit. There's no shadows, there's no highlights. It's just really, really flattering skin tones. And that's because the softbox is the snow on the ground. So the light's coming down, bouncing off the ground and filling in all the cracks on the face and doing all the things that a softbox would do. So it's not often I get that. Once every 250 weddings probably is my limit. I'll get snow in this country anyway. But it's just an example of what can be done. Water, windows, picture frames, you know, can have a similar effect as well. And obviously reflectors if you have a photography reflector. And then diffuse light. So again, you know, this is an overcast day. I think it was in November. I think it was a relatively pleasant day for November, but again, there's no strong light in this. It's quite soft. So again, it's flattering. It's going to flatter people in that it's not going to create shadows and show up skin pores and cracks and all those things that brides don't want to see on their wedding photos. So the direction of it doesn't make a massive difference because there is no sun in a particular direction sort of burning through. So it gives you the flexibility to move couples around pretty much how you want, and you just get your exposure and shoot for it. So it's not dramatic, it's not necessarily creative, but if you want to get just good exposures, good, safe, even exposures on people, diffuse light can work. And then there's Rembrandt lighting, which is more for studio type photography, where you control artificial light. And Rembrandt lighting is really about having a side of the face which has the main light source. So in this case, it would be a softbox, which is coming in from this side, sort of 45-degree angle coming on here, because you can see that there's much more light on this side of the face. And then we would have had either another flash further away or turned to a lower power, or a reflector at 45 degrees on this side. Because if we didn't have a reflector or a lower powered flash over here, this would be much more in shadow. And we want to see some detail on this side of the face. So this is how we go about doing that. So I can't remember, this was a shoot back in 2014. So I think we had 2 flashlights up, and I think we just had one a bit closer than the other. And that's how we achieved sort of Rembrandt lighting look. You know, this is not something that necessarily nature is going to give you, but if you ever do get into studio photography, it's good to have an understanding of the lighting you'll be using. And this is just really another example of it. So on that, I thought I'd just chuck this in. Again, I did say I'm not going to do too much on sort of flash stuff, but it's really more about the understanding of lighting. Now, Rembrandt lighting can be sort of broken down into broad light and short light. And in very simple terms, broad light is where you have the subject angled a way that the side of their face that is more visible is fully lit, and the side of their face that's angled slightly away from the camera is in the shade. Still a reflector on it, but it's more in the shade, a bit like over here. So this is the broad light here. So it's actually shot in broad light because I've got the light source on the wider part of the face. Now the impact that has, as you can see here, same subject, but this is with short light photography. So this is the reflector and this is the main light source on this side. Now the impact that has is that it actually makes the face look quite different. This is called broad light because it makes the face look broader. So this girl here looks like she's got a wider face because of the way she's been photographed here, whereas here her face looks thinner. So it's something to bear in mind if you're doing a lot of headshot work, depending on what your subject looks like and how you might want to flatter them and make them look, well, more pleasing to themselves, I suppose. So again, a couple of examples. This is just window light. These were natural light headshots I did. This young man, it's sort of slightly less broad because the light is on this side and he's turning away from it. Whereas on the girl here, she's turning her head more towards the light source. So there's more of a broad light on her face, makes her head look slightly broader. So it depends what you want to go for, but literally, if your light source is a window, as it was here, coming from the side, you just ask the person to just move their head like that, and you go from short to broad light just really, really quickly. That's something that you guys might want to play around with if you've got a willing subject. Good luck if it's a young child or a pet. That's all I can say. But if you've got someone that's a bit more responsive to instruction, then just find a window and get your longest portrait lens out and just have a practice with it. Oh, sorry, I'll just point out on that one as well. I didn't use reflectors on these. It's literally just a window. So although these setups here show that you've got a reflector and a softbox, you don't have to have a reflector. The fact is that there was glass down the side of this corridor. It was in a school. So there was light reflecting from this window back onto the other side anyway. With me, I'm not very technical, as I often say. I don't necessarily go and measure everything, but I will just do test shots and then work out if I like the quality of that light. And if I don't, then I'll change things up and move them. And that's really how I do it. It's not a very scientific or methodical approach. It's more a case of just testing, making sure you're happy and moving people around accordingly. Okay, so off-camera flash. So again, I'm not going to go into this too much detail, but this is something I sometimes have to do just to create a bit of drama. And this would be, I'm exposing for her face. The only flashlight here is behind her and it's lighting up the hairspray. So it's almost simulating a sort of, the sun sort of shining through a window here, just to make that hairspray shot look more dramatic. But there's no artificial light on her face. That's just an exposure I've taken for her face to make sure she's lit. But I know that if I throw a burst of flash when she's firing the hairspray, I know from experience it will have that effect. So but that flash is obviously not on the camera. There's nothing from the camera from this angle that's being lit. The only form of artificial light is a flash, that's remotely situated on a table that's blocked by the young lady here. And that's the key thing, because if the flash was sat there, it would just blast through and it would just spill out and ruin it. If you're going to do this, your subject has to block the flash so that the only thing it lights is the back of the head and all the hairspray around. And again, just an example of got a single flash gun on a light stand behind a couple at twilight, just to show what you can do and how creative you can get with a long lens as well, and quite a way away. I brought this forward from the first bit. Again, it's just to show you the stuff that I use. So when I talk about soft boxes, this is what I'm talking about down here. The one I've got has a white sheet thing that sort of Velcros over, which is the sort of softbox modifier for very sort of, you know, it fires the light out very wide, it fills all the shadows and the cracks. It's a very soft, very flattering light. I have this grid as well, which I put on, which is like a honeycomb effect grid, which fires it slightly more directionally. So rather than the light coming out and doing that, the softbox, the light comes out the softbox and goes straight. So if you are wanting to take a photograph of a couple, but you don't want the entire room around them all lit up, especially if there's lots of reflective surfaces, then I would put the honeycomb grid on it, and that would channel the light directly at the couple. So you're just getting more control over it. And then my magic light wands that I sometimes use, but not often, my light stands, my flashes with a controller that controls them from the top of the camera. I've got an LED light there, which is the one I used for that chandelier photo earlier. And I've got a more powerful flash here, which is the one I use with this softbox, which kicks out a bit more power than these ones. And then in a working scenario, so this is just a corporate shoot I did, it just goes to show how you can simultaneously, without having to physically change anything, you can create a very different look on the same scene. So one of my cameras, I've got my triggers to set up. I think I've got 3 flashes bouncing off the ceiling, so I've got a whitish ceiling, and they're firing up, and the light is spilling down so I can light everyone in the room. And on my other camera, I've got set up on a longer lens, a single flash, which is at the back of the room, aiming at the speaker podium, because I know whoever's speaking is going to be stood there, so I can rig a flash up, put a honeycomb grid on it to channel that light directly at the speaker's podium. And the effect is very different because we haven't got all the other flashes firing off in this. It's just the one flash lighting the speaker, photograph from the side, because we talked about the side light earlier. So the light's coming in here, which is much better than the light coming direct from the camera, which would then light up everything else around him, and it just wouldn't look anywhere near as slick and professional. So I won't go through the technical stuff for that because it's a bit unnecessary for you guys at this point, but it's just really showing what you can do with artificial light, you know, if you guys want to get into that, you know, as things progress. So I said I mentioned this, so the best times to shoot. For me, this is probably, for some of you, it's not exactly news, but the worst time to shoot is the middle of the day. And depending on the time of year, the midday sun is obviously going to be higher in the sky during the summer months than it is during the winter months. So in January, the sun never really gets that high in the sky. So, you know, winter light actually is quite often better than summer light. There's just not much of it. So you really want to be photographing around, and it's all dictated by sunset. There's no obviously set time because, as we all know, the sunsets at different times in the year, but it's all really from sunrise for an hour after sunrise is your golden hour. Then you have another window of a couple of hours, which is reasonably decent light. But then in the summer, you've got this period here, which is unfortunate because that's usually when I have to do all the group shots at weddings and sometimes the bride and groom portraits in really harsh midday sun. And then again, you wait, and then in the afternoon, the sun drops down on the other side of the horizon, it starts getting good, and it just gets better and better and better. And then you've got your golden hour, 1 hour before sunset. But don't forget, before sunrise and after sunset, you've got 20 minutes of twilight, which even though the sun is not going to be visible, there's still light in the sky because it's still spilling over the horizon, and you get sometimes really epic skies, and you can still take photographs. Now, the photographs here, just examples of the same couple on the same day where we've got nice low sun. You can see in all these photographs here, the one we looked at earlier is obviously backlight. Here it's kind of front light, but because it's low in the sky, it's a nice soft diffused flattering light, so it's doing all the right things. And then this one here where I've just sort of allowed the flare to sort of come through, so they're almost sort of silhouetted. There's a little bit of detail, but again, the sun's just behind them on the horizon. So all of these were taken when the light was good. And if I was to take these photos, unfortunately, I don't keep my photos that are really rubbish because I don't want anyone to see them, because I'm a professional photographer and I don't want crap stuff seeing the light of day. But I would know not to go out and take a couple on an engagement shoot at 1 o'clock in July. We just wouldn't do it. So I can't really show you examples of my stuff to sort of show this is what it would look like if we did it at midday. But I guarantee you there'd be shadows everywhere and it wouldn't look anywhere near as good. So moving away from weddings, because none of you are, to my knowledge, contacted me and said, Rafe, I want to be a wedding photographer, but you have to bear with me because that's most of my content is from weddings. But putting it into context that's more relevant for you guys, family photography, not in a professional sense necessarily, but more for your own family and friends. Bring all those learnings that we've just been through into a family environment. With families, don't expect your subjects to perform natural moments on cue. One of the hardest things for me is when I do a family shoot and they say, oh, we really want some natural family photos. And then they all stand there and look at me and sort of shrug their shoulders and say, what do you want us to do then? Okay, well, just go and have a walk as you would do, and I'll just come with you. And after 10 minutes, the kids will forget them there, and I'll get natural photos of them. But I can't make them do anything. I might say, oh, kids, why don't you have a race? Just run down there and run towards me, just to break the ice a bit and get them sort of having fun, so they think that it's not the worst way to spend a couple of hours. But if you're photographing your own kids, just bear in mind they won't necessarily do exactly what you want, which is why I say always have the camera ready. And everyone knows their kids, don't they? So even though they might not perform on cue, you might suspect they might do something daft or cute or whatever, and you can be ready for it. But have your cameras ready. That's the key thing. If your kid does something awesome, your camera's in the house, it's too late. You're not going to be able to get that moment. So if it's someone else's kids, as I often have when I'm working professionally, they're going to be very camera aware, particularly because the parents will say, come on, we're having a professional photographer, you've got to be good today. Just smile loads at the camera. And, they see this giant, great, scary man with a camera, and it takes them a while to warm up to me, but I soon get them on board, and then I can get the images that their parents wanted. So obviously, no brainer, but if you're photographing other people's kids, just make sure you've got their consent. It sounds like an obvious thing to say, but if you're photographing your kids at a public park or a playground, even though you're only photographing your kids, other people can be very sensitive to cameras. They might think you're trying to photograph their kids, so just be aware of that. And as we said in the first week, get eye level to your subject. So you're probably finding this, those of you that have got young kids, that the photos just look better if you get eye level with them. Shooting down just doesn't work unless it's the deliberate kind of, they're looking up into the camera. Sometimes that can work. And if you're photographing pets, good luck. That's all I can say. Particularly if you have a Springer Spaniel named Ted, as Richard does. And I've met Ted, and he's a lively dog, to say the least. So yeah, I'm not an expert on pet photography. It is a case of hoping for the best and putting a lot of time aside and a lot of patience. And some dogs will stop on command, but really they move so quickly. You've got to be nailing your focus with pets, particularly dogs, or anything really. So family photography, for me, I want genuine smiles. So tickle the kids. This is Sue and Mike and their grandson Reese, and just get them tickling, and everyone's laughing. Just get nice natural moments rather than just looking at the camera smiling. Sometimes I just isolate myself a little bit further back, so I just get these two sisters on a log, and I didn't tell them to muck about. They just started playing around, having a laugh, and I got my framing. I knew the light was good. It was just a case of waiting for a nice little moment and then just capturing it. Again, you know, I found a nice log for Emily and Andrew and their daughter just to sit on. We got some sort of straight up looking at the camera stuff. And then, you know, her sort of attention was sort of off me. So you start being able to get some more natural stuff then. That's more my kind of family photography. You sort of do the straight up stuff. This is how I sort of do it. I do the straight up stuff. They've got that one for, you know, Granny in the frame or looking smile at the camera. But they're really booking me for this kind of stuff. And I just need to let them forget about me and be themselves, and then I can get it. And this will be the same for you guys if you're photographing your kids. They will forget about you and the camera eventually, and you'll be able to get natural stuff. My kids are the hardest kids to photograph in the world. They're sick of the sight of my camera. They're very camera aware. They're not comfortable being photographed. So for me, it's an epic achievement if I get a good natural photo of them. Everyone else's kids that I photograph professionally are much easier to photograph than my own. So hopefully you'll have more luck than me. And just, you know, again, interesting compositions, just, you know, try something different, go for interesting cropping, blur out the body, shoot from above. I know this breaks the rule of get eye level, but it's intentionally shot this way with a, you know, a very low f-stop so that I can just get the eyes sharp and everything else can be out of focus. And then, you know, try and tell a story. And this was my youngest boy, Roscoe's first day at Hitchin Boys School, secondary school. First time he had to put a tie on and a blazer. And although you can see his enthusiasm for being photographed here, I did manage to get a few natural photos of him. And even his mum took a photo of me helping him do his hair. And, you know, it was only 15 minutes. I was probably there 15, 20 minutes. But I knew that where the light was in his bedroom. So, you know, I knew how to use the light. And even when we didn't have the light, you know, I just set the camera exposure so that it was manual, so the light behind didn't ruin the exposure. And then off he went. So it's nice to sort of, rather than just focus on one photo, you know, maybe do a little project. I mean, for those of you that are time rich at the moment, I guess like I am, it's a good time to be doing these sort of things. And it's a great way to skill yourself up. See how many decent photos you can get from one event, and challenge yourself to maybe get more next time. Have a sip of water, guys, bear with me. Okay, so street photography. Street photography is, by definition, kind of what it sounds like, really. It's outside of the confines of your own home. And for me, it's obviously non-professional work. I didn't get enough time to do street photography until the lockdown, and then I realised that I had time to do street photography, but there was no one out there. Hitchin in the first lockdown was like a ghost town, like most places, and ironically, there was hardly any infections back then, and hardly anyone around. And the streets were deserted, and now it feels like everyone's out still, and there's loads of infections. So go figure that one out. But back in April, you know, we had a lovely spring, as you remember. We had some gorgeous light, and the weather was great. And I didn't want to just sit around indoors, so I went out and I tried to capture what was going on in Hitchin with some photos like this, trying to get anything interesting. But the key thing with street photography is, again, you're using light, composition, and moment very much so. So natural photography. You need patience because things don't just align themselves perfectly instantly, and you will maybe dig yourself in for a photo that you're trying to get, and it might not happen. You might have to just be prepared to sack it off. Smaller cameras are generally better. If you go out with a you know, Canon 5D and a 7200 lens with a lens hood on it, you'll look like a stalker. So I tend to try and go out and put a small lens on my camera. I mean, my cameras are SLRs, they're reasonably large, but if you have a smaller lens on, it looks a lot more subtle than a great big long telephoto. So I tend to shoot sort of 35mm if I can, because like, that's my smallest lens and it's very discreet. And I'll maybe use the flip screen to sort of have it so it looks like I'm just sort of holding it like a video camera. I tend to find that I can look at the camera rather than the subject then, and it's a little bit less freaky to do that. So it sort of works better for me, and it doesn't get noticed quite as much. Because as you say, I mean, it's not like you're going to get a negative reaction with every street photo you take. Some people might be like, oh, hiya, you know, and wave. But as soon as they look at the camera and wave at you or give you the finger or whatever, you know, your moment's gone. So you want to get it like it is here with this lady cleaning the windows before you're spotted. That's the skill. So those of you with smaller cameras might find this easier, more discreet. Having said that, in terms of lenses, I find that if I've only got a 35mm prime, it does limit me. So if I see something that's a little bit out of my reach that looks really interesting, I might not get there quick enough to do it, or it might be too small in the frame. So if you've got something like a 24-70 or a 24-105 would be a really good lens for street photography. That's a Canon lens that's quite well made. You can get an f4 one of those for a sensible amount of money. That gives you flexibility from 24mm to 105. 105 is quite zoomed, so it's not as big a lens as a 7200, so it's a little bit more subtle and it's a little bit cheaper as well. That would probably be a good lens for street photography. You don't get a huge amount of depth of field. It's the only thing, but it's a good sharp lens, and it's a sort of professional standard lens, but it's not mega bucks. So zoom lenses just give you the ability to quickly, you know, move in on the subject without having to run over and kind of kill the moment. Just a few recent examples of street photography photos. Me nearly getting run over by an Irish hunt over near the Burren. I stupidly, as I often do, was so keen to, I was like, oh my God, there's a hunt. This is amazing. I need to get out the car. I need to photograph this. And I just threw myself in a verge exactly where they were going, and literally had these fantastic horses inches away from me. And you can see some slightly perplexed looks from the huntsman there going, what the hell are you doing, dude? But I got some pretty cool photos, and it was a pretty epic moment, but slightly frightening. This one was just a school sports day, the teacher race, Purton School, for those here who are Purton people. I know there's a few here that live in Purton. I might recognise some of the staff here. This was probably a good 5 or 6 years ago now, I imagine, this one. And, you know, it, just a photo of space hoppers, but just interesting because this teacher here is inverted and everyone's laughing at him, including that teacher. So it just kind of worked as a fun photo. I particularly like the teacher here with a spoon in the mouth, a wooden spoon in the mouth as well. This was just taken last summer at Freshwater Bay on the Isle of Wight. Not my kids, someone else's kids. Parents weren't around, so couldn't ask them for permission. I had a long lens on anyway, it's 135. I just knew that it was going to be a very bright photograph, but I wanted the detail of the sea. I didn't want it to just be completely white. So I had to think about my exposure on that one. Very high shutter speed, obviously. It was a bright day, so my ISO was like 100. My shutter speed was probably like 4,000. And I shot at maybe f2.8, f3.2, something like that. And it was just kids running in and out of the surf. It was a strange day. It was a day we had massive waves in the summer. It was quite a warm day, but we had a big swell come in, almost like winter seas, but in the summer. Quite strange. And this is just a sort of a slightly different take. I mean, I'm a big fan of classic cars and modern classics, and sort of a hobby away from work for me, going to car shows, taking whatever cars I've got at the time along. And sometimes you just get fixated in just photographing the cars straight up. The people there with mobile phones just walking around going click, click, click. And actually it was the two old boys in this car that were the interesting thing for me. So I made the composition very different, lost the front of the car, so the car's practically not recognizable. But it was all about these chaps just having a chat about the old days. I think it was the fact this one looked like my dad, which sort of probably was one of the reasons why I took it. But also just making it an interesting composition by just having all this dead space. It it almost looks like a really sloppy photograph, but for me it works somewhat better because I'm deliberately trying to make the person look at the drivers, or the old men, rather than the car. So it's a deliberate attempt at taking the car out of the frame. So they're at a classic car show in an old car. You can tell it's an old car, but the photo's about them and not the car. So I had to remove the grille of the car to make that obvious. And again, tell a story. So this is some photos from my, April, May, during the heart of the lockdown, all taken around kitchen. Just anything interesting really that I could see, playing with sort of silhouettes and really good light. My kids shooting baskets at the local park where there was no one else around, which is pretty much what we did for exercise. And then them buzzing around in a car park on a little quad bike. My girlfriend cutting her son's hair when we were all having to cut our own hair, which will be happening again soon because mine's a bloody shambles. The lady with the bright red hair that works in M&S, who just fascinated me, and the light just lit her hair up, and I just took that photo from inside because it was just interesting. And then obviously when we were doing our 8 o'clock claps for the NHS, there was the old lady downstairs, and I just managed to get her hands poking out. So just anything interesting really I was seeing during that time to try and tell the story of, what we were living at the time. Slightly more difficult now because it's freezing out there, it's grey, it's miserable, and it's horrible. But you'll be amazed there's still stuff to photograph, even when it is how it is at the moment. You've just got to go out and look for it. So that is the end of the presentation. The homework for next week will be to basically try and shoot in manual again. That's what we're trying to do. So keep pushing yourselves on this, guys. I want 2 portrait photos from each of you. One that is where you're thinking about the angle of light. So anything but a just straight up, boring light photo. I want you to have thought about where the light's coming from. Now, obviously, I can't dictate the weather over the next week, other than I know it's going to be pretty cold. But hopefully, if we get some brightness, if you've got time to get out with the camera and you see that the sun's out, that's the time to go and use the light, because you've got actual directional light that you can play around with and do something interesting. I also want you to think about sort of flattering composition. So when I talk about flattering composition, things that are going to look good. So not shooting up nostrils and trying to sort of blur backgrounds. Think about your lens choice, getting good quality light so there's not too many shadows. So they're the 2 things I really want you to think about over the next week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come off the screen share now. And let's go back on here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to dig through a few of your photos that you sent. I'm happy for you to unmute yourselves if you want to contribute at any point now or ask any questions, but I'll just smoke through a few of the images that were sent in, and then there'll be Q&A for anyone who's got anything they want to ask. And if I'm discussing your image and you want to tell me something about it, then unmute yourself and chip in, guys, by all means. Actually, I need to share the screen again, don't I? Bear with me. Screen. Okay, so I had a look through everything you sent me through from last week. The consistent comments that I had from some of you were that it was quite difficult. I know that a lot of you guys just didn't have a huge amount of time to really get your teeth into it. So you sort of took a few quick snaps and rushed them through, which is absolutely fine. As I said to a couple of you, don't be despondent if you're not mastering manual mode after 1 lesson with me for an hour. That is, I don't expect you to. I expect you to struggle. I expect you to fail. I do want you to try. That's the thing. So well done for those of you that gave it a go. Some of these images, I'm just going to see if I can move this box. I've got the actual metadata built into the image, which is great because it shows me the settings you use. So for these first couple, these snowdrops, they were photographed with the ISO at 100, f10, and the shutter speed was 1/5 of a second. Now, it doesn't look like a particularly bright day, so that ISO straight away needs to come up, because I don't think there's any benefit to having blurry photos of snowdrops. So first of all, you can bring that f-stop right down, because you don't need to see everything in this sort of front to back sharpness. So you could bring that down to whatever that lens stops down to, even if it's only f5.6. Put the ISO up to maybe 800, and then that shutter speed, then you'll be able to have that at, you know, 2/50th, 3/20th of a second. So these images will be nice and sharp. So same again on this one. I think this was shot at f16. So very similar, very slow shutter speed, low ISO. You can, you know, if it's a grey day, if it's a bit overcast, just remember what you need to do to let more light in. This one's obviously a lot better. This one is ISO 1250, f13, and 60th of a second. So just about fast enough to be able to be handheld and take a shot. But again, you know, it doesn't need to be f13. That could be f5.6, and you probably have 400th of a second to play with on the shutter speed for the same exposure. But the key thing is that the photographer realised they needed to get that ISO up, which they did, and then they've got a photo that's actually sharp. I don't have any metadata on this one or EXIF data, but you can tell this one's shot at a decent high speed because the authors captured the drops here. So I would imagine that's probably at least 500th of a second, and it's fairly shallow depth of field as well. On this one, I guess it's for depth of field. Probably with a longer lens, you might blur the background a little bit more, but you know, I can see what the author's trying to do there. And this one is of a dog sat strangely still, but I guess I'm assuming this one was the depth of field because the dog doesn't look like it's moving, so it doesn't look like the shutter speed needed to be high. But it's a nice photo of the dog, and you've got the head sharp, which is the main thing. This one I think was sent from before. It was supposed to be for the sort of leading lines because we've got the leading lines coming in, but it's a nice symmetrical composition. It works quite well. I think if you drop down a tiny bit lower, you might get this up into that open space a bit more. That might work even better. It's a good image. And again, I think this one's probably shutter speed to freeze the water from the fountains. I can't see how fast it is, but it's probably, again, at least 500th of a second to be able to freeze those water droplets. So this one would be depth of field. It looks to me on this one like the focus has missed off the flowers. I don't think they're in focus either. So that might have been an autofocus going a bit wonky, or maybe manual focus. But if you're going to blur out the kids behind and draw the eye to the flowers, make sure the flowers are in focus. This one worked rather better. That's a good example of high shutter speed there. So you've got the kids frozen in the air. There's no blur. Everything's nice and sharp. You know, if you want to make this perfect, just straighten off that horizon, and then you can just crop in and get rid of the stuff you don't need to see. And get that horizon on the third like that, and it just tidies it up a little bit. And again, this one here is nice as well. Kids running. And I can't see what the data is on that, but it's a nice sort of frozen moment. We got depth of field here. I was looking at the settings on this, and I thought you could put the ISO up on this because it's at 400, and your shutter speed then could be a lot higher. Although you've done a good job here, this is fairly focused, fairly sharp for 125th of a second. I'm not sure I could hold the camera that steady. But all you need to do to give yourself more shutter speed is just crank that ISO up, clearly you're at f2.8, so you can't drop that much lower. That might be as low as your lens goes. So the solution would be put the ISO up to maybe 1600, and then you'll have a nice high shutter speed. You won't worry about any shakiness or blurriness on that. This one, I think the intention here must have been to have movement or blur, because the authors photographed it at ISO 100 f8, which is quite high, and obviously only a tenth of a second, which is a very slow shutter speed.
That was Rafe. That was me trying to get fast shutter speed and on Purton Pond, but
Okay.
trying to freeze the water. So my son dropped a stone into the water, and I took the shot just as he, sort of taking a few shots as he was dropping the stones into the water.
Yeah. Okay. So on that one, Kate, just get your aperture down, because f8 is quite high. Get your ISO up.
Right.
And you'll be able to set. You'll probably want a shutter speed of about 500 of a second. So to get from a tenth to 500th, you're going to have to change these settings quite a lot.
Yeah.
What you've done is you've gone the opposite way. You've gone the sort of settings that if you were trying to get a river to look milky, by putting a tripod on a camera and photographing a river at a tenth of a second, that would give you that sort of milky, sort of hazy look. What you're trying to do is freeze fast action. So your settings need to go in the opposite direction. So
I really struggled.
That's all right. No, just for next time. But it's the same. Some other people have had the same issue. Crank that ISO up, and then get that f-stop down, and then you'll be able to select a higher shutter speed.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
This one, I guess, is depth.
That's mine as well. I took that today.
Yeah. Well, you got
depth of field. Trying to get the
1.8. So you blurred the background nicely on that one. Some nice, interesting colours on that one. So yeah, that's worked really well. You've got your settings spot on that one, perfectly exposed. So nice one.
Good. Thank you.
This one, I couldn't work out if this one, I assume this one was for depth of field because the bike's clearly not moving.
Yeah, I didn't fancy blurring out too much of it. Because when I did that, it just looked like I was taking a picture of a exhaust pipe.
Sure, no, I get that.
It could see even me, and it's my exhaust pipe.
No,
so yeah, I worked to try and get a bit more of the bike in.
That's good to know, and the fact that that was your intent is the important thing, Kev, because I wasn't sure if you were trying to blur the bike. But the fact that you just told me you were trying to keep the detail on the front end of it is great, because your focus is spot on. It's here, and you've almost got a bit of a leading line there as well. But no, that's good. I mean, it's, as I say, it's all sharp at this end anyway, but you can still see. I think if you were trying to get a more creative shot, I would bring yourself round more, walk round to the back of the bike a bit more, an angle, get focused on the exit part of the exhaust, and drop your lens down to f2.8, and you get a really interesting composition then. Try and get the handlebars on the front of the bike blurred out behind, but I think that would look more interesting. So I think more blur would actually help this, in my opinion, but still it's a good image. I really like the composition on this one and the empty space here for the bubbles to go into. I think that works really, really well. Again, I'm guessing this is on shutter speed.
Yeah, it's a thousandth.
Yeah. So you've I can't see your settings, Kev, but I'm guessing you had your ISO pretty high to be able to get that indoors.
Yeah, 3200. It was grainy as anything. It was, yeah, I nearly didn't submit it, but it worked.
No, it did. It's a really good image. I just love almost like speech bubbles. You could almost put some text in there, couldn't you? That can I have a yogurt, or whatever. But no, I really like that. It's a really interesting image. It's a really good composition, and I like the fact that you've been brave enough to leave a bit of dead space in it. I think it works well. Okay, so on this one, I believe that's probably depth of field, just because there's not a huge amount of movement, but I've got the settings on there so the exposure is pretty good. It's maybe a tad bright, but it's pretty much there. The shutter speed is manageable at 160th and f5. If that was the lowest your lens stopped down to, which it might have been if it was a kit lens, then obviously you can't really get much more blurred than that. but it is a nice, interesting composition. Maybe you could have it a smidge darker, it'd still be okay. But you've got all these sort of catkins behind as well, so it does work quite well. This one here of the horse. So it's quite a high shutter speed, 400th of a second. But again, not knowing your lens limitations, I know it was shot 44.8mm, which indicates it's probably a camera with a fixed lens that sort of zooms in and out itself. You probably could get a more interesting composition if you move around. I don't know if you could get around here, so you lose some of the whatever you call this sort of tape, fencing tape, kind of cutting through the horse. But I think you probably could have gone maybe a little higher on the shutter speed. Could have been, it doesn't look blurry, but I maybe would have gone just slightly higher on that. But I would have worked on the composition a bit. And if your lens stops down below 6.3, then you could do that. You could leave your ISO at 800, stop that down to maybe f4, and then you get a shutter speed of maybe 640 to the second, 800 to the second, something like that. So you would end up with even more freezing of the horse, but you'd still get the same exposure. This one looked like it was depth of field. So it's nice, clear, interesting composition. That works well. The one with the little dog, I wasn't quite sure if they were supposed to be. I mean, it's taken at quite a high shutter speed, 1,250th, but the dog doesn't seem to be moving that quickly. Some lovely colours in this. Moss or lichen, moss I guess it is, with the spores on it. That's just a really interesting composition, fairly blurred out behind, but that works quite nicely. This one here, although the composition does not really work because the car is kind of leaving the scene, I can see that the aim was to freeze the motion, which at 2,000th of a second, the author has done that. They've put their ISO up reasonably high. Their f-stop is lower. So although it might not be the most interesting photo in the world, they've achieved what they set out, which is to freeze something moving relatively quickly and get everything exposed. And they've understood that they need to drop their f-stop to be able to do that. And in that regard, it works well. Another one for depth of field. Got a nice leading line on this one. Just leading through, nice bit of blur behind. And we've got Ted the dog, Ted the Springer, hopefully dragging his owners through that as well. I imagine he probably did, or at least brought some of that water back with him to his owners. With this one, looking at the shutter speed, although that's fairly quick, I think with a dog like a dog that moves as quick as Ted does, he needs to be at least 1,000th of a second. So all you need to do there is just double that ISO, get that up to 1,600, and then you can shoot at 1,000th of a second, and that's really going to freeze the frame. It's obviously a bit of a grey day. You haven't got a massive amount of light to play with, but there is still a bit of movement in the frame here. You can see now whether that was intentional or not. I would say with a photo like this, you really want it to be pin sharp. So you really want to.
It wasn't intentional, Rafe. It was just a poor photograph.
But yeah, you can definitely push your shutter speed up there by just getting that ISO up a bit more. But
it's blurred head as well, which is not good, is it? There you go.
Yeah, no, it's fine. This one worked quite nicely. Depth field. Looks like you used your nifty 50 1.8 on this one, Richard. You did well to get that sharp at 125th. Unless you just had the camera sat on the chessboard and you were on maybe auto mode on it. But that's quite a low shutter speed. You probably could have cranked your ISO up a bit more there, giving yourself a bit more speed to play with. You got your aperture spot on, f1.8, make sure the chess pieces are blurred. But yeah, just on that one, I would just get that ISO up. 1,600 will probably give you about 160th of a second, I guess. Trying to sort of do my maths here on my fingers, but I think that would give you enough to, and it would just be a little bit sharper then, because at this speed, there's going to be a very tiny little bit of shake at 125th of a second. This one here, I think the authors tried to freeze the water coming out. But again, it probably needs to be a higher speed. I would say, again, at least 100th, unless that is actually ice, in which case I stand corrected and there's not much they could do about it. I think that's water, but I would go with a higher shutter speed on that to really freeze it, at least 1,000th. If you can get even higher than that, go for it. And this one's lovely, beautifully composed, nicely balanced shot, really lovely depth of field. I believe the daffs have come out and the weather's gone apocalyptically cold again, which it always seems to do. And a nice depth of field shot of this seagull, and then the seagull flying. Again, I can't see the settings, but that must be a fairly high shutter speed because it looks pretty frozen to me. It's really not easy to do that. I know, I remember my days of trying to photograph seagulls flying, and they change direction so quickly. They're also white, which is very difficult for the camera to lock onto, especially if there's a white sky behind. The camera can't work out what to focus on. Notoriously difficult things to get pin sharp on. In this case, probably had more success because it was a slightly darker background, but if that bird was flying into there, your camera would have a nightmare trying to lock onto something to separate it from the background. And I really like this one because you've got the angle of the line on here. Again, very simple things you can do in post on this is just little stuff like this, just a little bit of cropping. Just all that does is it just accentuates the leading line, takes from the corner of the frame through the birds. You don't lose any of the birds, but just minor adjustments make a bit of a difference. But that is nice. We got what looks like a brother and a sister on a trampoline here, shot through the netting, showing shutter speed. Again, I can't see the settings, but they're obviously bouncing up and down, so they're probably at least 500th of a second, I would have thought. Looks like a fairly grey day, so not a huge amount of light. All I'd suggest on this one, if you can do it, I know you've got the safety netting, but if you can, maybe poke your camera through a gap where the zip is, just so you lose the netting. You're just going to find that's a slightly cleaner photograph. But yeah, no, it's a good example of shutter speed being used, and they do, to be fair, look sharp, even though obviously you've got the sort of the netting foreground. And I don't know if this one was shutter speed or depth of field, because the depth of field isn't really showing on this one, so it might be that maybe they were firing the Nerf bullets, and maybe you were trying to capture them coming out. Obviously, don't go and stand in front of them and take a Nerf bullet to the head trying to do it, but you could probably get a little bit lower and get more of them and a little bit less of this, because I don't think this space is really adding anything to the composition. So maybe, you know, tighten it in a little bit. Obviously, if you could, you can't get this detail in, but you can always crop in post. If there's no bullets to be shown in the thing, then you can just tighten it a little bit like that. Okay, last couple. Got a sundial, which is obviously depth of field one, which works quite nicely. It's a nice composition. And then a couple of a small little hound running towards them. The shutter speed in this looks good. It's 1,000th of a second. I can tell that it's a dark day. It's a bit underexposed. Looking at this, all the author needs to do is get that ISO up. It's what I've said to a lot of you, to give yourself more light, give yourself more speed, get a sharper image, make it brighter, push your ISO up. You can leave all the other settings, put that at, I don't know, 800, 1,000, and this will be brighter. You might be able to put the shutter speed up even more, and you can get a really good action shot of the dog running then. So anyway, that's feedback on homework. I'm now going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open up the floor to any questions that you guys may have. So does anyone have anything they want to throw at me? Unmute yourself if you're talking, guys, because I can't hear you.
Hi, Rafe. It's Sophia.
Hi, Sophia.
Hello. I have loads of questions, but I'll just stick with one. The flash that comes with my SLR, is that actually worth using? Because when pre this course, I would always use it just because I thought it would enhance the photo. But since I've been learning about all the stuff you've taught us, I find it really overexposes images. So is there any value in actually using that, or any context where it's relevant?
Do you mean a flash gun?
No, I mean the I mean the flash that actually comes with the camera with my SLR.
Yeah, the pop-up flash. Sorry, yes.
Yeah, the pop-up. Yeah.
Simple answer is no. I would disable that permanently. You'll find your photography gets a lot better without it. There's no scenario I can think of where you're going to take more interesting, better photos with a very small flash that pops up right where above the lens. You know, honestly, it won't do anything more than your mobile phone would do. The whole idea of an SLR for me is to use the depth of field you get with them and the creativity you can bring and the bigger sensor to create better images. I would just use light. I would focus on natural light, and once you've really got comfortable with natural light and using it, then you can explore flash. But then I would say if you're going to explore flash, you do it in the way I said earlier, which is using it off the camera so that your artificial light source is not coming from the same direction as the camera. It's coming from the side or behind, and you'll find your shots are much more three-dimensional and much more interesting. But those pop-up flashes, they are really for auto modes, for people that just want to take a straight up, record shot of something. There's no control over the power of that flash. It will really, I don't even know if it will work in manual mode. I don't even know if you can use it, to be honest, in manual mode. I think it's really just there in a dark room situation where the camera will just decide how much flash it needs to fire because you put it in auto and it's taken a meter reading and it just goes boom and it just takes a guess. But you'll find that it's very unflattering flashlight because it just burns out all the skin, red eyes, all that stuff. It's just not great. I don't think you need to use it. I would encourage you not to use it, in fact.
Yeah, I did actually disable it after our first lesson because I noticed all my photos were coming out overexposed. So you've answered my question. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. If you've got any other questions, feel free to ask.
Hi, Rafe. It's Aloha here. I asked
Hi,
a
Aloha.
question. Hi. I was looking at the post that you put in the Facebook group for the cameras.
Yes.
I went to the two shops and compared a couple of lenses. I'm going to ask you, the one, the Infinite one, comes with a 1-year warranty, and the Panomas, they come with a 3-year warranty. I wanted to ask, there is a difference in price, but do you recommend going for the kind of photography? For example, I know most of us are not professional photographers. Would you recommend just going for the one with the 12-month warranty, the 1-year warranty, or the 3-year warranty?
It's a difficult one. I've just brought up your comment. Actually, I've just seen it now. I don't really know. I'm a bit of a gambler. I have never had a lens stop working unless I've dropped it and made it stop working. They generally, if you look after them and you put your lens caps on when you've used them and you keep them, away from moisture and you don't leave them outside in the freezing cold, lenses will go on and go on. I've got lenses that are 10 years old that are still soldering away for me. So you'd be very unlucky to have to use a warranty anyway. More likely you'd need to use a warranty on a camera because a camera has thousands of things that can go wrong and a lens really doesn't have much other than the glass coming use, or really with a lens it's usually if it gets dropped, that's the problem. So if you've got home insurance and you've got your camera equipment under your home insurance, you might be covered if you were to drop your lens on home insurance. Potentially you'd have to look into that. I've got camera insurance because my gear has to be insured professionally and it's worth 20 odd grand or whatever. But I would think if you're going to save £100, it's worth considering that's £100.
Yeah.
You won't, these are all legit sellers. These are not scammers. These are genuine, you know, shops that offer very good prices. I wouldn't recommend if I didn't believe in them and trust them myself. So you're going to get the same product for £100 less with a 1-year warranty. So I would be tempted to take the cheaper offer if it was me.
Okay.
But one thing to check out, just one more thing on that, Aloha, just check the delivery times, because everything, I don't know, you guys probably know with everything. I mean, I'm about to move flat and I'm looking at, I was thinking of ordering some new furniture and it was like 16-week delivery time. And I was like, that's like a third of a year. I'm not waiting that long for a bit of furniture. And it's very similar with a lot of other stuff. So electronics as well, check the delivery time, because if the delivery time difference was like, you know, a month or two, you might want to pay the extra 100 and go with the one that you're going to get immediately rather than the one that you're going to have to wait longer for. So just check that out as well.
Okay. Sorry, last thing. My body is also quite old. It's EOS 450D. Does that matter?
My body's quite old as well, but my cameras aren't, luckily. No, I think one of the things I said at the beginning of the course was that the lenses will make more of a difference than the camera body. You're going to take better photos with a Canon 450D and a really nice 85mm f1.8 lens than you would with a what's an example, a Canon, I don't even know what the latest sort of amateur camera is, but you could buy a 400D or something, or one of a newer version for £600. But if you only shot with a kit lens, I don't think you're going to get as nice images. I think you'll be surprised what a 450D can do.
Okay, thank you.
The difference in the cameras is more if you're going to take a lot of photos in really challenging sort of lighting conditions. Like if you were going to photograph a wedding in a church with a 450D, it's not going to be able to do what my camera does. But if you're in a garden in the summer, it's not going to make a massive difference, especially if you've got a nice lens on it. So I think I go lenses first, and then if you find that you do then want a better camera, if you stay with Canon, you can just use those new lenses with the new camera body and sell the old camera body. So that's what I did. I think I went camera body, got some good lenses, then I wanted a better camera to match the better lenses, and I kind of staggered it. You know what I mean? That would be my advice.
I've got you. Thank you.
No worries. Anyone else got anything for me, guys?
I've got one more if no one else is going to go.
Yeah, go for it.
You mentioned earlier the best times to shoot, and I loved that diagram. That was really helpful. Does that apply to landscape photography too, or is that specifically for people?
That does apply to landscape photography. We're going to cover that next week. We're going to do the other kind of disciplines of landscape and other sort of wildlife and hobby stuff as well. Yes, it absolutely does. If you were to take a photograph of the same landscape at midday in the summer, and then at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the evening, it's going to look very, very different. So I would say I can't think of a circumstance where you're going to be better off photographing anything in the middle of the day in the summer than you would do when the sun comes up or goes down at that time, because I can't think of a situation where the light is going to be more flattering being above your head, like a spotlight, which is what the sun's like in the summer, than like a softbox coming from the side, whether it's animals, people, cars, even buildings. You've just, the light is warmer, it's a different temperature, it feels shadows. I might be wrong, but I can't really think of an example of how landscape photography would be better in the middle of the day. I think it's always, you look at the great landscape photos, nearly all of them are taken at the beginning and the ending of the day. There's not much to do in the middle.
Okay.
I mean, I'll give you an example. I did a nature photography course twice, actually, in Florida, when I went over in 2014, the first time with my kids, and then again 2 years later in 2016. And I paid a professional wildlife photographer, whatever I paid, a few £100 to basically take me around some sites around the Everglades with, and I think I borrowed his 500mm lens because I wasn't prepared to spend 10 grand on one, and just listen to him because for me, I wanted to just improve at a photographic discipline that I'd never had to do professionally and see what I could do. And we met really early in the morning. It was like the sun hadn't even come up, and I was taking silhouette photos of ospreys and herons and all this epic stuff at sort of 6 in the morning. And we literally stopped from about 11 in the morning till about 2, and we just went and sat in a restaurant and just talked and drank coffee and ate burgers, and then came out again at like 2:33 where the light started getting better. And that was nature photography, because the light was so harsh in Florida. Not only was it hot, but it was just the photos were just dull and just uninteresting. And then everything got interesting again later in the day. So I think it's a long answer to what you've asked, but yeah, I just really don't enjoy taking any kind of photos in the middle of the day, particularly in the summer. It is different in the winter though, because the sun just never gets as high, so it's always a little bit softer in the winter.
Yeah, it was to do really with winter, and I'm in Scotland and in the Highlands at the moment.
Don't get much light this time of year, do you?
Yeah, so when I popped out in the afternoon last week, I think I went out around 3:30 or 4 p.m. I was just thinking, should I have come out earlier, because it was quite kind of dreary and grey. So I wasn't sure if I should have come out around kind of midday time to take some photos.
So the answer to that is if it's a grey day and there's not going to be any sun, you might as well go out in the middle of the day, because if it's going to be grey the entire day and you know the forecast is cloud, you're not going to get a break in it, then it will be slightly less dark, but still grey at midday than it will be at 4 o'clock. So it depends on the weather, because you're going to get just diffused light whichever time of day you do it, but it will be very slightly lighter diffused light in the middle of the day. But if the sky parted and you were out at midday, you're going to suddenly get harsh light from above. And if that, if it was 3:30 and the sky is parted, you're going to get lovely, warm, soft light coming in from the side. So I think if it's going to be grey, yeah, it doesn't really matter what time of day, because the sun is a non-factor. It's just light. It's just sort of backlighting a load of cloud, which is just diffusing very uninteresting flat light across everything.
Thanks, Rafe. That's really helpful.
No problem.
Rafe, I've got a technical question.
Yeah, go for it, Kev.
So I've had my 7D for about 10 years, I think, since they first came out, and various lenses I've got with it. But I've never had any servicing work done on it, and I've never used the actual question, whether you've used the focus matching service that Canon do. Well, have you ever used any of the Canon CPS services? But do you think it's worth doing the focus matching thing?
I don't know what the focus matching is actually. The only things that I've done with my cameras, and they obviously get a battering year on year, is I have the sensor cleaned, which if you haven't had that cleaned, you really want to get it cleaned after 10 years, because it will, every time you take a lens off,
Yeah.
dust will
I've cleaned it myself before a couple of years ago, but not since. Yeah,
it might be worth, I think, if you take it to CPS down in Elstree, that's where I take my cameras, and say, look, I've had this for a while, I have done a sensor clean, but it's probably due another one and probably needs a bit of a check over and a service. I basically I've sort of got to the point now where I replaced my last cameras at the point where they're probably due a service anyway, and just bought new ones because I hammered the hell out of them. They were still fine, but I think over the time of frame you've had it, I would do a service, get the sensor clean while it's being serviced. And in terms of focus matching, do you mean lens calibration, or is that something different?
No, so I don't fully understand it myself, which is why I asked. But if you've not used it, then you're probably not going to be any much the wiser. I know you can do the calibration, but they will match a lens and a body for focusing to help you get pin sharp results. And
that is lens calibration. I'm pretty sure that is
right.
Calibrating lenses to your camera. So you need to. It's something that you can do yourself. I've never tried it because I haven't got the patience, to be honest. But I had my lenses calibrated a couple of years ago by someone who did have the patience. Actually, I just paid a friend a bit of cash to do it. And she's way more patient than I am with stuff like that. But again, it's probably worth doing that. I think if you're going to keep it, I would, if you can see yourself using that for another year, Kev, I would do all of those things so that your lenses are calibrated and they're pin sharp, the sensor's clean, and the camera is generally running okay. My view is that I would get the sensor cleaned on my camera annually. I calibrate my lenses every 2 years, but a lot of people do it a lot more frequently. But really, unless the camera is developed to fault, I tend not to do anything else because I just keep using it. They're pretty durable cameras. I mean, the 7D is a robust bit of kit. It's a pretty solid thing that a lot of professionals use them. So if you're going to keep it, do it. If you think you're going to replace it in 3 or 4 months, I wouldn't waste the money, to be honest. If it's still working okay.
Yeah, the same advice that you gave the other lady. I've got no reason to change this, and I'd rather spend the money on glass. So
yeah, and as 7D is a good solid camera, you get some lovely lenses on that, and that'll make you don't really need there aren't features on other cameras that I think you're missing out on. I think the 7D is
Wi-Fi is the only one.
Yeah, I know. Do you know I never use it though? I just take the memory card out, put it in the laptop.
It's probably quicker. Yeah, probably.
I know I'm old school, but there are a lot of features on cameras that I think the reason I've got the very latest camera, the latest Canon, the R6, is because I need the autofocus to be absolutely without compromise because of the nature of the work I do. I can't say to a bride, sorry, my camera's not the best, it's a bit slow focusing, didn't get you walking down the aisle, never mind. I can't make excuses. I've got to be nailing everything. So yeah, that's why I have the cameras I have. But there's millions of features on my camera I would never use, and a lot of it's just stuff they cram in just so they can get a leg up on Sony or Nikon for 5 minutes before they release another feature, because it looks like impressive tech and the magazines might mention it. But honestly, the 7D is a good solid manual SLR camera with a good bit of glass. It'll take beautiful pictures, and if that's all you need, then yeah, stick with it.
Cheers.
All right, mate, no worries.
Hi, Rafe. This is Don. I just want to ask a question regarding lighting.
Yeah.
And do you ever use reflectors when you are outside and you wish to have more light on your subject?
I don't use reflectors. Some photographers do, but it usually means you have to have an assistant to hold them. You can't hold your own reflector and be a photographer. And I don't like to be restricted. So, Don, you've been out with me on a couple of family shoots now. How I do family shoots. You've seen that I don't bring a load of stuff with me. I just have my 2 cameras, one on each shoulder with a wide and a long lens, and off we go into the woods. That's my approach. And I do that on wedding days. I do it in engagement shoots. I will make sure that the images, that the light is doing all the right things, so I don't have to rely on a reflector. If I was challenged by a client, say, I really want a photo stood under this waterfall or by this tree, this is what we want, and I realized that actually I needed a reflector because the light was quite harsh, or there was some shadows that I wasn't happy with, I knew that I had to get that photo. I'd bring someone to hold a reflector and I'd do it. But the nature of my work is much more, let's see what we get. I go off with my wedding couples on a wedding day, and we go off and I'll see stuff and I go, great, let's go over here. This will work really well. And I don't go somewhere that I know I would need a reflector.
Yeah.
So it's not an essential thing. It's more, I'll tell you when it's more useful is in studio photography, when you've got the time to, faff about, and when you're in a studio, you're limited as to how far you can move around anyway. You're just there. So sometimes you do want to fill in a shadow to get that perfect portrait. But I don't really do studio work now. So it's if that's something you want to get into and you want to have technically 100% perfect portrait photos of people, a reflector is worth getting because they're not much money, but you need to have someone to hold that for you because you just can't do both. That's the only thing with reflectors, unless you've got one that sort of sits up on a stand but then even then, for me, it's one more thing to think about and worry about, and it's not for me personally, but a lot of photographers do. So
Yeah.
personal choice, Tom.
Okay. Thanks, man.
All right, no worries.
One more question.
Yep.
I wanted to ask a question about, we've talked about lighting and composition, specifically lighting a picture where you have people of varying skin tones. I really struggle with that, especially when it's artificial lighting. I'm black, my husband's white. So sometimes I find that when we take pictures together, is it that I'm too dark in the photo or he's washed out if I look all right? And that's a problem for me. And I wanted to find out, especially how to do that, like winter time in the house, with artificial light, maybe like a ring light or something. Like, do I set that? That's one question I wanted to ask as well.
I know that's a good question. I've done a few, maybe photographed possibly about a dozen mixed race weddings where one of the couple has been a different skin color, and it is a challenge in certain lighting. It becomes less of an issue in flat diffused lighting. When the sun is shining, it will burn out white skin very, very quickly, whereas it might actually expose black skin in the way you want. So the softer the light, the less of an issue it is. It would be quite difficult to try and compensate by firing flash. I think when I've done it, I've just been very conscious of trying to make sure that I get an exposure for the darker skin, so that they're not, completely silhouetted. But I'm also keeping an eye on the fairer skin person to make sure I don't blow the highlights in that. So it's like sort of walking along a sort of a tightrope almost. It just gives you less room for error, and there isn't much you can do about it. And certainly, if you've shot in auto mode, your exposure will depend on which person you're pointing the camera at. So if the camera is pointing at you, it's going to overexpose. If it's at your partner, it's going to, if he's of fair skin, then it's going to underexpose you, and you're not going to see the detail in your skin. So again, it's another reason why manual is better, because your head can make that decision. So, especially if you've got an automatic mode and your metering is set to spot metering, so that wherever the focus point is, it adjusts the metering and the light for that particular thing. So it's pointing at a light or a dark subject, then you're going to get very different readings. I think just try and find soft, diffused light where you can, if you're looking to get photos together. Try and avoid firing flash, because that will burn out the fairer skin very quickly. Yeah, that's really about all the advice I can kind of give. I know that when I did a wedding a few years ago now, but the groom had very dark skin and the bride was blonde with very fair skin, and I quickly realized that if I put the sun behind them, it was sort of the rim light, the backlighting, the light that was on their faces was kind of, it was light that sort of come around the back of them, and it diffused and it was softer, and that was working to almost sort of have the light behind. So just don't have the light source pointing directly at you. That would be my best advice, because that is where you're going to get the contrast is going to be much higher.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, guys, I've got probably time for one more before we toddle off for the evening. Anyone else got one more? Okay, guys, look, thank you once again for your attention and your input. It's been a good session, hopefully. So keep going with manual. Like I said, you'll only get better if you keep failing. And just those of you that were struggling a bit with shutter speed, just push that ISO up next time, and you'll find you can get much better shutter speeds. That's the key thing I saw from what you guys sent in. Have a good week. Enjoy the cold weather, and I will see you all next week. Ta-ta.
Thanks, Ray.
So,
Thanks,
right.
Ray.
Have a good
Cheers.
week. See you next
Bye.
week. Bye-bye.